We're going to be talking about real property OSINT and researching public records. And I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time on here, but I do want to point out the mini OSINT challenge in the top right-hand corner, and details on how to get yourself a challenge coin are in that hallway that was mentioned at the start of this talk. So really quick, we're going to be talking about property OSINT, which is a past life specialty. This talk is intended really to be an introduction to real property records. It is really how you can leverage property records and the information that you can source from those for open source intelligence gathering opportunities and related resources. So I am going to fly through this material because there is a ton of stuff here. If there are any questions, please drop them into the chat. I will happily answer them following this presentation. You're also welcome to point out all the mistakes I'm making. So let's go. Introduction. What is real property? We're going to talk about county government offices and records, and what is public record. We're going to talk about different document types and the effects that those documents have on real property. We're also going to talk about real property maps, how those are made, what types of maps exist, and how those create legal descriptions. Then we're going to sum all of this up together while performing a title search on a real piece of property. And finally, we'll have a quick conclusion of what we learned and how to protect your own data in your real life. All right, so introduction. What is real property? Real property means any property that is fixed to a piece of land. It is not personal property like boats, cars, airplanes, trains. All that stuff is considered personal property. We're talking about actual land that may or may not be improved with structures like buildings. During a property transaction, you can read all the stuff on the right now or later, but basically what happens is the buyer and the seller will go to an escrow and title company. They will open up a new order, and the escrow company will act as an intermediary to make sure that the buyer and the seller each get what they're promised and everybody leaves happy. So they will have a title search report performed on the piece of land. They'll determine any liens or outstanding debts associated with the piece of property. They'll also collect the money from either the buyer or the lender who is financing the purchase, and make sure that everything changes hands appropriately and that the documents to say that this piece of property has been transferred from one party to the other go of record in the county where this property is. Government offices keep records. There are two main offices that are involved with property records. One is the assessor tax collector, who handles property tax value, property taxes, and collecting those taxes. This office also designates each property with sort of a social security number for a piece of property called an assessor's parcel number or assessor's identification number. The county clerk recorder records all the documents associated with property transactions. They use that assessor's parcel number to reference pieces of property, and they have all of the records related to real property in the county, maps and other documents that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So public record, there are a few different types of public record. What we're talking about today is official record, which is property documents and maps. There's also vital records, which can contain birth certificates, marriage license, death certificates, things affecting people and their relationships, lives and deaths. There's also business records, things like fictitious business name, statements that are of record, business licenses, all those types of things. Those things are something that we are not going to touch today. We're going to talk about only official records affecting real property. Types of property documents. Each type of document has an effect on a piece of property. A grant deed is a typical title of a document that will transact a piece of property, transferring it from one party to another. The grantor is the person or entity who is transferring the property out of title, away from them. The grantee is the party who is receiving the property and is usually mentioned in the grants to section. There's also going to be a legal description, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, and typically a notary public seal showing that the person that signed the document had the right to transfer this piece of property using this document. Next, you have a deed of trust. The deed of trust is essentially a piece of paper or document that states that there is an amount of money owed on this piece of property. And when you purchase a piece of property, if you take out a loan from a bank, they will record a deed of trust right after the deed where you acquire title that says that you owe them a chunk of money before you're allowed to then sell this property to somebody else. So in this case, we have a deed of trust that says the first person owes the second person X amount of dollars, 45,000 and some change, against this piece of property that's located in this area and this lot number. So that's what this document says, is the first party owes the second party money, and First American Title is going to act as a trustee when this loan is paid off to record a document that says this money has been satisfied and it's no longer owed against this piece of property. This is an easement deed. An easement deed records the right of another party who does not own the piece of land to use or enjoy this piece of land in a very specific way. So typically this would be something like a driveway easement. Maybe the parcel is landlocked behind another piece of property and they need an easement to cross a neighbor's piece of property to get to their own. I've seen some easements that can actually say things like, for golf balls for properties that are sitting next to golf courses. So the golf course will have an easement to allow golf balls to fly over adjoining properties so that nobody can sue anyone. What's also important to notice about these property documents is once they go of record, they are of record forever. And the only way to remove these things is to record another document that abandons that or satisfies that lien or reconveys that deed of trust. This is a mechanics lien, and you'll see these go of record in a case where a contractor worked on a large development, a subdivision, and maybe they weren't paid for all of the plumbing work that they did by the developer of the subdivision. You can also see them happen for folks that decide they're going to improve their driveway or make some improvements to their home, and they hire a contractor to come in and repave something or upgrade a bathroom, and they don't pay that that contractor's fee. Then typically after a set period of time, that contractor will file a mechanics lien against their property to make sure if they ever sell the house, they have to satisfy the lien and pay this debt for this contractor's work. We're going to talk very quickly about maps, and I'm going to jump through these so quickly that your head's probably going to spin, but I have a lot of information on these slides, which will be available after the talk, and you're welcome to reach out to me about any of these details. Essentially, each state is split by a middle and a horizontal, so a median and a baseline. And from that center point, every other piece of property in the state is divided into smaller and smaller grids of properties. And each of these 1 mile by 1 mile squares, which is the smallest measurement, are referred to as a township, section, and range along that grid in each state. The center point will be different, but ultimately the way that these properties are described is very similar. So if you see at the top of this map, you can see section 10, 9 township, 8 south, range 2 west. That relates to those grid lines that divide every state and every piece of land within a state based on their center point and that meridian and baseline axis. An assessor's map is what is created by the assessor's office to map every piece of property that is taxed within the county. This map is what ultimately makes up that assessor's parcel number, or the AIN, APN, that is referenced to a piece of property. And this is important because it's a number that's going to be on every document related to this property. It's a number that's going to be used to reference this property at the county clerk's office and the assessor's office. So if you can find this, you can find a lot more information using this data point. In this case, if we use the piece of property at the bottommost point of the properties on the map, we can see that there's a circle that says 27. We can also see that there's a bigger circle on the outside of that section that says 282. And we can see in the top right corner of this map that there is a 959-28. So 959 is the book, 28 is the page, 282 in the oval, that's the section of this map. There's another section 281. And then you can see the 27 that's circled within this lot. So the assessor's parcel number of this piece of property is 959-282-27. And you'll note also that the number in the circle doesn't always match the lot number of the parcel, which is part of the legal description of the piece of property. How are legal descriptions created? Legal descriptions are created using parcel maps, record of survey maps, and some other official maps that are drawn and then put of record by a licensed surveyor. And I won't get into too much detail here, but parcel maps typically change property boundary lines, whereas record of survey maps will document the existing boundary lines and are used to create a more simple legal description. What do I mean by that? Some legal descriptions can be downright scary. Some legal descriptions actually state every line to line, dot to dot description of the outside boundary of the piece of property. And sometimes people will decide to hire a licensed surveyor to survey the land to create a definitive map that shows exactly where those boundary lines are in order to create a simpler legal description. Ultimately, what I'm saying is meets and bounds legal descriptions are the worst. They're very difficult to follow. It requires a licensed surveyor to map these out to say, yes, the piece of property you bought is actually correct versus this legal description on your grant deed. And it can be really pricey, upwards of $10,000 to have a licensed surveyor go out and map a piece of property. So most people just stick to the jumbled mess that you see on the right-hand side of your screen and say it's well and fine and good enough until they have to go to court and there's some easement or legal property boundary line discrepancy. So performing a title search. When we're performing a title search, we're using some of the components that I've touched on very briefly and at a very high level to discover more information about a piece of property. We're going to be using an address that is extremely well known, infamous even, very popular, and you could put this address into Google and find out all the information yourself, but we're going to take kind of the longer route using this piece of property just for demonstrative purposes. So we're going to assume that we have a street address and we're going to start looking around to see what we can learn about this piece of property using tools that scrape public record, things that you would have to physically go to the county clerk or county assessor's office to request copies of and pay for, and actually do the research in person, which is something that I find fascinating and fun, but most people don't enjoy. So we're going to put that into Redfin. We found some information about this property, the size of the acres of land, the last time it was sold, August 16th of 2016, the fact that the last transaction was for $100 million. And we see that it's in Los Angeles's area. And this information was found on Redfin. Then we're going to move over to Zillow, which is shown on the right-hand side of this slide. This is information that's taken from various different public sources and kind of compiled into a easy to read version. And what I've highlighted here in yellow is you'll see that there's a parcel number referenced there at the bottom. This parcel number is in Los Angeles County, what they call the AIN, or Assessor's Identification Number. So we're going to be using this number as we go to the next slide, where we go to the county tax record office and we use the AIN and address to find the property tax record online that is available for this piece of property. We're looking to make sure that the address and the AIN that we have matches the record that we want to look at, and the one that's highlighted in blue is the one that we're going to click on. And yes, you can check any county for the most part in the United States and see the property tax record online for any property. The situs address is the address that is assigned to the piece of property for kind of legal purposes and by the USPS. Some properties that are not developed or don't have a house may not have a situs address assigned to them. From the property tax record, you can learn about the tax rate area. You can learn the tax use code, which can help you determine whether this is a residential, manufacturing, light industrial, or commercial property if you're unaware. You can also see the lot and land value versus the improvement value. So how much is the land valued at? How much is the home or the improvements, buildings, shops, things like that valued at? And we can learn from this some other information about the parcel, like whether or not it's active, it's current, maybe it changed. Sometimes when properties merge or change, their identification numbers also change, and it may reference a new one. We can also see that there's a parcel map available from the assessor's office. So this would be the assessor's parcel map. And we're going to pull that up, and we can see here that the assessor's parcel map shows our piece of property. We have the AIN number using the map book page and that circled number. You can see that lot 34 is our parcel, and the sources for each of these bits of information are underneath all of the slides, so you can refer to those if you want to do this research on your own later. We can also see on, I think, probably one of my most favorite websites for property and real estate research at the moment, Property Shark, that this piece of property has a shorter legal description. Here it's track number 9061, lot 34, and the southeast 40 feet measured at right angles to the southeast line of lot 33. Well, what does that mean? So we can see in this legal description that they're referring to lot 34, but also a portion of lot 33 that has been somewhat merged into this one piece of land. So now we know that the neighbor gave up about 40 feet along their property line to this other property, which is kind of neat to know. We also found a bunch of other information here about this piece of property, including the assessed value and when it was transacted last time, which we learned from other sites. So matching these things together helps us establish that that information is accurate. But the most beneficial thing here, and title and escrow companies have tools that they pay for licensing to gather this information and view the documents just right there in the applications. But since we don't have access to those tools, we're relying on what's available from public resources, and I do not have a license for this piece of software. So this is what we're able to glean just truly through open source means of gathering information. We can see there is a grant deed. It was put of record on 8/16/2016. And we can also see that there's a deed of trust that was recorded after that in March of 2017. So the really neat thing about this is we know that when the property changed hands, that everything before this should have been taken care of by the title company. I mean, they made sure all the liens were paid, that the old deeds of trust were paid off. So there's only 2 documents in this title chain that are really relevant to right now, unless we wanted to go back in and really find out how they got that 40 feet and some other details about easements or things that would be across this piece of property. Those will all be back in the history of the chain of title, which goes back to the beginning of time when the state started tracking real property records. But for our purposes, we just kind of want to know who bought this piece of property and how much money do they owe on it. So what I went ahead and did was I made a request from the Los Angeles County Recorder's office, and I pulled together the information I discovered, the property document title, the short legal description, the document, the year it was recorded, the document number or the book and page at which it was recorded. And then I had to kind of guess just based on what I know, the grantor or grantee name, which was required to submit the form, but they didn't seem to mind if it didn't match. So I submitted this order. They said, hey, we've got your order and you've given us permission to charge up to X amount of dollars on your card to retrieve the 2 copies of these documents. I ordered physical copies. So they're going to actually mail these to me in the mail, which is kind of fun. And I want to see the grant deed, the entire thing, and the deed of trust, the entire thing. And they sent them to me, and they're actually right here. So we're going to look at some screenshots of the important bits. But first, it is utterly fascinating what you can get for 50 bucks from the county recorder's office. Narrator, it was more than 50 bucks. But moving right along, who acquired title to this piece of property? According to the grant deed that I was able to get from the county recorder's office, which they mailed me as in that envelope, the Mansion Holdings LLC company that owned the piece of property at the time sold it to Mapleton Manor LLC. The document was recorded on 8/12/16, but you can see, I'm sorry, it was recorded on 8/16/2016, but you can see that it was dated on the 12th, which is usually the day that they like print this document out, and then they'll have the people come in and sign, and then they put it of record when everything else in escrow is good to go and the money is ready to change hands and wires are ready to be sent and all that stuff. We can also see that between the documentary transfer tax and the city transfer tax, that in just transfer tax alone, the amount of $560,000 was paid just for the privilege of transferring this property from one place to another, which I find just mind-boggling. Those numbers used to just blow my mind when I was recording documents for the 3 title companies that I would manage their recordings. We can also see a much more detailed legal description attached to this grant deed. And I wanted to also show you the stamp that comes from the recorder's office that certifies that this is a true copy of the original document. And this would be something that makes it legal and binding in the eyes of whatever entity was subpoenaing it or affidavit requesting it, whatever, legal. So this is what makes it official. And you can see that there's parcel 1 and parcel 2. Parcel 1 is the description of the larger lot. Parcel 2 is the description of the smaller lot. And then at the bottom, it says both of these parcels are described as follows, and it gives that whole meets and bounds legal description with all that township section and range and degrees and feet this way and feet that way that would be in a legal survey of this piece of land. We can also see that there is a loan that was put of record through that recording of the deed of trust, which came a few months after they actually acquired title on the property. So the new owners took out a loan or borrowed money from Raymond James Bank on March 17th of 2017, and they borrowed $50 million against this piece of property, which is supposed to be paid off by April 1st of 2047, which is normal, about a 30-year loan. And that there's TD Service Company acting as the trustee to certify and then record the reconveyance of the deed of trust once this is paid off. We can see the loan number for this deed of trust, which is important because if I were trying to create a pretext where I wanted to pose as a company who was offering to refinance this loan, or maybe I want to pose as the title company that recorded this document and get in touch with this owner and sound legitimate, I could use both the escrow number and the loan number to sound like I was legitimately a representative of those entities. So that's just a scary note to note. So anyway, conclusion here is there is so much data and information that is out there in the wild of the world, especially related to real property. And this information has your name attached to it, can tell people where you live, can tell them what properties you own, all these types of things. And so it's important to be careful about how you acquire title to property. It is possible for an individual and a company and what's called a trust to own real property. And you can create a trust that is in any name you want. Most people say, you know, so-and-so and so-and-so's irrevocable trust of 1992, and that's the name of their trust. And that was when they created it. And it's human nature to want to put your name on things that you own, but there's nothing that stipulates that you have to put your name in the name of your trust. You could call it the Purple Unicorn Bunny Trust and nobody can stop you. So you can create your own trust, use a name that is not associated with your personal name, your family name, or anything that would be identifying of you, similar to how those LLCs used different company names to acquire title to that piece of property. And you can kind of blur the lines of who actually owns it and make it harder for people to figure out what property you own by hiding your name behind the trust and making the trust the entity that owns that piece of property. You can use PO boxes to receive your tax statements. Those PO boxes go of record on the document themselves and then at the assessor's office. So if people are pulling copies of documents, and literally anyone can do that, they could get your address, your mailing address, details about you. It's all not great. So using PO boxes can help to suppress the amount of data leakage that you have out there in public records, because again, all those documents are of record forever. And don't let other individuals, whether it's a phone call, an email, something you receive in the mail, don't let other humans verify and validate their requests with you using information that you know is of public record. So for example, if you own your home and your name is associated with your tax records, don't let people just use the fact that they know you own a piece of property to gain your trust. Don't let them build rapport with you or legitimacy of their request by using things like your loan number, the title company that you do business with, the bank that you do business with, the escrow or title number that was on your most recent file or the recording of your documents. All of those things are open, accessible, and readily available to people if they know how to look for them. So ensure that you do your due diligence to stop the conversation, make sure that you take the time to verify and validate those requests, and ensure that you protect your own assets. You can absolutely do that in a way that's non-confrontational and respectful. But I would always encourage people to stop a phone call and insist on calling the number of the actual company back. I would insist on receiving an email from a legitimate company domain as opposed to anything that anyone could register a free email account for in order to, start a conversation about, refinancing your mortgage or anything like that. And so those are just a few tips that you can use to ensure that your data is a little bit more private than maybe some of what's out there. And it's never too early to start. And that is the talk, folks. So now Q&A, I will happily meet you in the hallway. I would love to discuss this stuff more. And I will be sticking around there for the remainder of the afternoon. You are welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn /IN/Alethe. And I am on Twitter, very creative Twitter name there. You can find me there and connect with me there as well and continue the conversation. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for attending this talk. I appreciate it more than you know.